Just a quick note, I stayed up all night to make this video possible, so as a show of appreciation, I'd love you to like this video and subscribe if you haven't already. Alternatively, feel free to leave a comment saying that I'm just doing my job, and that's cool too. Before we get into this video and the latest juicy Brexit news, I need to treat you to a bit of dry parliamentary procedure. I'm sorry, but it's just really necessary that you understand how bills are passed through the UK's parliamentary system, and I promise this will be quick. When the government proposes a bill, it starts life in the Commons and passes through 5 core phases. The first reading, the second reading, the committee stage, the report stage, and then finally the third reading. Presuming it's signed off, it heads to the House of Lords, where a very similar process takes place. The purpose of the House of Lords is to hold the government to account, scrutinise their bills and ensure that they're fit for purpose. As such, they won't veto any of the bills coming from the Commons. They might amend the bills, they might delay them, but they won't block big bills like this one. If the Lords also passes the bill without any amendments, then it heads straight to the Queen for royal assent, and the bill passes into law. However, if the Lords amend the bill, it has to return to the Commons to get their sign-off on the new version of the bill. The Commons can then either accept the Lords' changes or make further amendments. This can lead to a process known as ping-ponging, where both houses end up making endless changes, unable to agree on the bill's wording, with the bill bouncing back and forth between the two houses. So why am I telling you this? Well, as you might have noticed, Johnson is trying to get Brexit done, and a big part of that is getting his withdrawal agreement bill passed through Parliament by the end of January. And he absolutely needs to get this bill passed before the deadline, or his deal will either fail or be delayed. With his huge majority in the House of Commons, the bill sailed through the Commons with no amendments. So having passed through the Commons, it now makes its way to the upper chamber, the House of Lords. Johnson was probably hoping that it would easily be able to pass through the Lords too, and head straight to royal assent. But unfortunately for Johnson, this isn't how things played out, with the Lords passing 3 amendments to the bill, substantially changing the withdrawal agreement and also delaying Johnson's tight timeline. The most substantial amendment related to the rights of EU citizens living in the UK. The amendment would grant all EU citizens in the UK the automatic right to stay, instead of forcing them to apply to the Home Office. Current rules give EU citizens until the end of June 2021 to apply for settled status. The current system has seen 2.7 million people apply to stay in the UK, and approaching 2.5 million of them have had their applications processed and have been told that they can continue living and working in the UK after Brexit. But this amendment would see regulations changed so that these rights were automatically granted. The Lib Dem peer Lord Oates commented on the amendment, saying that this amendment simply seeks to uphold the promise repeatedly made by Boris Johnson that the rights of EU citizens to remain in the UK would be automatically granted. He went on to say that it would remove the risk that those who failed to meet the cut-off deadline would be automatically criminalised and subject to deportation. The second part of this amendment states that EU citizens living in the UK would be granted physical proof of their right to live in the country, something like an ID card. Under the current system, EU citizens receive a digital code, but many worry this isn't enough to protect the right of EU migrants. The fear is that a digital system could lead to many of the same issues experienced during the Windrush scandal, where lawful migrants were threatened with deportation. This seems to be a pretty widespread concern, with a report from Northumbria University and the 3 Million finding that 90% of EU citizens want a physical card to show their right to live in the UK in order to prevent discrimination from employers and landlords. In fact, Lord Oates commented on this too, saying that without physical documents, EU citizens would be severely disadvantaged when it comes to landlords, airlines, employers and other officials.
Thank the noble Baroness, the Minister, for her response. But I must say, my lords, I am utterly bewildered by it. This really is not a complicated issue. There are millions of EU, EEA and Swiss national citizens who are desperately concerned and are asking for physical proof. The Minister says that to provide them with physical proof will be confusing. My lords, we have a system of permanent residence in this country for non-EU citizens. For those people, and my husband is one of them, he has in his passport a Home Office sticker, rather nice, colourful thing with watermarks and all sorts of anti-fraud protection, which gives him permanent leave to remain. It is physical proof. We could do it. We just need the same scheme. But the complication about having a system where there is no physical proof is that landlords, employers or others who may be used to having that physical proof may well not accept or find it difficult to deal with people who don't have that.
And I think it's not impossible that we would get to a situation, whether intended or not, whereby people would be asked to produce proof in this form if there was physical identity. And it would therefore become, by the back door, an identity card required of EU citizens but not of UK citizens.
I may be missing something here, but I want to be able to drive a motor vehicle in this country. I make an application, but I'm given a document. It's perhaps a modern form of a document, but it makes it clear that any time I'm stopped by a policeman that I have a legitimate licence. What is wrong with applying that system to the circumstances we're describing here?
And also, his point about ID card creep is also part of this point. And it's exactly what happened to the Windrush generation, my lords. The government is adamant that we must avoid a situation where, years down the line, EU citizens who have built their lives here find themselves struggling to prove their rights and entitlements in the UK.
The Minister also said that there was a danger of ID card creep. I don't think there's any danger of that at all. Again, we already have a system for permanent residents in which physical proof is provided.
So this major amendment seeks to change the two biggest objections related to the rights of EU citizens, ensuring they have an automatic guaranteed right to remain in the UK and granting them physical proof of this right. When the amendment made it to the floor of the Lords, here's what happened.
There have voted contents 270, not contents 229. So the contents have it.
As you just saw, the amendment passed the vote with 270 votes in favour and 229 against. However, with the government's majority, they can likely still overturn the result. In fact, Home Office Minister Brandon Lewis tweeted in response to the vote, saying that he disagreed with the results of today's House of Lords vote. The EU settlement scheme grants EU citizens with a secure digital status which can't be lost, stolen or tampered with. There will be no change to our digital approach. So this was the government's first defeat in the Lords. In fact, it was the first defeat in any chamber for this new Johnson government. But it wasn't the last that the Lords would issue to Johnson. The next two amendments both relate to how EU law will be handled in the UK post-Brexit. The second amendment dealt with the ways that UK courts were able to deviate from the rulings of the European Court of Justice, limiting ministers' powers to set aside ECJ rulings. This amendment passed through the Lords with 241 votes in favour and 205 against. The third and final amendment changed which British courts could override old European Court of Justice judgments. The original version of the Withdrawal Agreement Bill said that only the UK Supreme Court could make rulings which overrode precedents set by the ECJ. Then, in this latest version of the bill, Johnson changed it so that any court could overrule the ECJ's previous rulings. However, this third amendment would see the powers handed back to the Supreme Court alone.
There have voted content 206, not content 186. So the contents have it.
As you just saw, that amendment passed 206 votes in favour, 186 against. So the Lords voted for three amendments, changing the way that EU citizens and EU laws will be handled after Brexit, and deviating from the government's plans. Luckily for Johnson, he has a pretty huge majority in the House of Commons, and with a majority that large, it's fairly easy to get whatever you want. If the Conservatives vote along party lines, and there's no reason to suspect they won't, then Johnson could easily overturn these amendments in the House of Commons. Ultimately then, this is likely to be no more than a hiccup. It's certainly an embarrassing setback for Johnson to have his bill significantly amended in the Lords. A possibly embarrassing move, but a small delay which is unlikely to stop him from progressing his bill and getting Brexit done just the way he wants it. Be sure to subscribe to the channel if you want to be updated when the bill makes it back to the Commons, as well as updates throughout all of the Brexit process. You can also find us across all social networks simply by searching for TLDR News.